What is up, people of YouTube? I'm your host Vernon. This is Las Vegas Creek. Let's fish that. Alright, so to understand why we're out here today for some fishing, I quickly need to explain that quite recently I actually managed to break my bait casting rod. So for the last few weeks I've been spending quite a lot of time researching some rods, especially on YouTube. Now there are a lot of great options out there, but I realized that most of the videos were talking about $150 to $500 range, and then $1,000 to $1,500 range for some fishing rods. Now of course, if you have the means to do that, I would highly recommend it. Some of these rods are actually very good, very sensitive. You can catch many fish on them without them breaking. But the vast majority of fishermen can actually not spend $500 on a fishing rod. And with that in mind, I went onto Amazon, had a look at some of the rods they have available there. And after having a look around, I finally ended up getting a $40 rod. And that is what this video is about today. I want to use that rod and see whether it's any good. So in a way, it's kind of a rod review. It's not a sponsored video or anything. I just want to have a look at this cheap rod and see whether it's any good. Alright guys, so if this rod is actually better than I think it is, I will put a link in the description down below if you want to have a look at it. If not, I'm not going to put a link there. But this is our rod. This is what we ended up getting. This is a N-Sport E-Series bait casting rod. I chose this specific one because this one actually has a special feature. You get 2 tips for the price of 1. So you in effect get 2 rods. You have a medium heavy and a medium. I am a sucker for a bargain. That's why I went with this particular rod. So let's unpack it and have a look. Alright, and there we have it. It is a 7-foot medium heavy bait casting rod. First impressions of this rod, it's actually very lightweight, but worried that it might actually break if you catch a big fish. That's what we want to test out here today. As far as the looks are concerned, I have no problem with the little camo thing. That's something you can get used to, but I have to say this gold inlay thing that they got on here, that's a bit kitsch to my liking. But what can you expect from a $40 rod? So far I am actually rather impressed. Let's get some reels on there and start some fishing. Alright, so we made our way to the deep hole. That's where I believe the fish will be, especially with these grass. Perfect place for the bass to hide under this cover. Just want to point out that I have a second rod out here. That's my trusty old ugly stick. That one I have some night crawlers on there, hoping for some catfish or something. And then the little rod we're testing out today, this is of course a 7-foot. That extra foot from a 6-foot to a 7-foot helps out quite a lot for bank anglers. That just gives you that little bit extra casting distance. But I am starting out with a little shaky head. With this bait, the idea is not to cast out as far as possible, but I'm rather going to try and pick specific spots where I think the bass might be and just jig around the little shaky head. I'm starting off with a shaky head because it's kind of weedless. That means it might get through the cover a lot easier rather than using a smaller thing like a little Ned rig or something. But I might have to swap over to that because we know that the fish that are in here aren't that big. Not going to find any 8-pounders out here, so maybe a smaller presentation should be better. Alright, but let's get our baits out there, see if we can find any bass. First little thing I need to mention about this rod is the sensitivity on the tip. It's not the most precise sensitive rod out there, but you can feel when you're hitting little rocks and stuff on the bottom. So you can at least feel when you're on the bottom. As far as figuring out whether it's rock or wood that you're going over, that you won't be able to tell with this rod. Alright guys, we finally have a little fish. Oh, just lost him. Hopefully we got that on camera, because that's actually the third little fish that I got. They keep coming off. I think this little lure that I'm using is too big for them, because it's not even quarter pounders that I'm catching at the moment. So not really big fish, but quite sensitive rod. You can actually feel when you get the hit, and setting the hook, it's quite immediate. You import all the action directly to your lure, setting the hook rather quick. So far so good, but now I just need to actually land one of these little guys. Problem I'm having at the moment, I feel this little shaky head is quite light. I'm struggling to get precision casts. It feels like it needs a little bit more weight. And of course the water, the rushing movement of the water, it kind of feels like it's not really sinking down to the bottom or blowing down current. There we go guys, finally got one on the little Ned rig. The moment I swapped over, finally get one. This is why I'm saying, I'm thinking the little shaky head was too big for them. This is the size of the bass we have around here. Got a few hits from them, but finally managed to land one. Lovely little tiny largemouth bass. Let's get him back into the water. And off he goes. Now the general idea is that I'm not going to be using this rod as a worm rod. I have my little loose speed stick for that. Feel with a spinning rod you have better accuracy pitching into the cover. So even though this is not the intended purpose for using this rod, it is nice to know that I can still catch fish using some worms on this rod at least. And we know that this rod can handle some smaller fish. So we're off to a good start. There we go, another tiny little channel catfish. Reason I'm using the second rod, hopefully to get some bigger fish, some of the bigger channel catfish and some of the carp we know are in here, to start feeding. That way I can perhaps use some normal baits on the other rod to see whether we can get some bigger fish, because at the moment we're only getting some small fish. The best way to test out the new rod would be to get some big fish so we can see how it handles the bigger fish. There we go guys, got another fish on. Feels a bit better than the first few. Still a little bass, a bit bigger than the first one. This one completely swallowed my Ned rig. See if we can get it out there safely. Alright guys, I had to use my little forceps to do some surgery on this guy, but we got the hook out safely. Just want to get the fish some oxygen. Lovely little colors on this bass. Lovely fat little bass, not the biggest out there. A lovely fat belly on him. Let's get this guy back into the water. He's biting down on my finger, so he's ready to go. And off he goes. Went straight in between my legs, find somewhere to hide, but down, back to his hole he goes. This is why it's important to have forceps. You don't want to be using your fingers or big bulky pliers to get in there to try and remove that hook. Luckily he wasn't gut hooked or gill hooked, he just swallowed it very deep down, but we managed to get it out safely. Alright, we also finally managed to get a bigger channel cat. This kind of proves to me that there are some bigger fish still in this hole. So I think maybe I need to swap out the lure for some baits, see if I can get any bigger fish on the new rod. Let's release this catfish. Off he goes. Alright, ladies and gents, I need to stress that this is not how you fish with a bait caster. I'm just using this with a little night crawler and some corn on there. I'm going to throw it back in the hole, hoping for some bigger fish to show up. I want to test out how sturdy this rod is, whether it can actually handle some bigger fish. That is why I'm going to use this. Not the ideal way to fish with a bait caster, but let's see if we get some bigger fish. There we go, guys. We have a little fish on. Not a big fish. We'll just get this bell. It is a little channel catfish. It does have quite a lot of head shakes. Rod's handling it pretty well. There we go, little channel catfish landed. Once again, this fish swallowed the hook, so I have to go get the pliers. This of course means I have to walk with the fish to where I left my stuff. This means we get to test the rod out, dragging this little fish to shallow waters. Alright guys, we got a little channel cat, gonna let him go, and off he goes. So why did I rely on the rod tip and not the line to bring in that fish? Well, quite simply, I'm using 6-pound test line out there. So you need the rod to absorb a lot of the pull and strain from the fish. And so far I have to say, quite impressed with this little rod. It seems to be doing what it should. Alright, so pretty happy thus far, but I have now removed the medium heavy tip of the rod, and I'll put on the second one that is just a medium. Did this so that I can try and cast around some smaller baits. It seemed that with the medium heavy tip, it didn't want me to cast something that didn't weigh much. So let's try with the medium one and see if that makes a difference. Maybe I can cast around some lighter weight lures. And there we go, guys. Got a little bass on our medium tip as well. This one on a little inline spinner. Not the biggest guy, but I love catching these little guys. They put up a decent fight in this current we got going down here. Nice big jaw on him. Let's get him back into the water. And off he goes. I have to say, even the medium setup makes it a lot easier to cast lightweight stuff, but still decent strength, nice handling some fish with that as well. Alright guys, am I saying you need to go and buy this rod immediately? No, I'm not saying that. Bass fishing is a multi-billion-dollar business. Lots of companies out there, lots of different brands, different styles. A lot of the things are pretty good, some are not so good. I took a gamble on this specific rod and I found that for me it works pretty well. If I was going to buy my nephew a rod to get into bass fishing, this is the type of thing I would buy him. Having 2 different rod tips, great way of figuring out how these rods work. That being said, is this the best rod I've ever owned? No, it's not. It's also not the worst rod I've ever owned. We didn't catch any monsters out there today, but from the few fish I did catch, this rod handles pretty well, and I'm excited to see what else I can catch with it. Now, if I was going to be entering some elite bass tournament somewhere, this is not the rod I'll pick for that. But for the average guy out there trying to find some fish, just have some fun catching some little fish, great rod to do that. And of course, the price tag, $40, isn't that much for a bass rod, and I think this one handles pretty well for that price range. But by no means am I an experienced bass angler, so if anyone's watching and they have some favorite rods they'd like to recommend to other people, please go down in the comments and go tell us what's your favorite rod to use. But if you want to get into bass fishing, I can highly recommend this cheap rod. Better to break a cheap rod than breaking an expensive rod. Alright guys, but remember to leave a little like on this video, write any comments down below, ask any questions down there. If you've not subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so by hitting the red subscribe button, joining my community. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.